Hello everyone, welcome to the CSUA Research Workshop. We're going to discuss both strategies for how to prepare for research, strategies for how to approach research and get into research labs, and finally strategies for how to make the most of your research experience. First, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Ani, I'm the CSUA president and I use the He series, and my research interests are efficient ML, which is machine learning, parallel computing, and systems for machine learning.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm an officer here. I do RL, decision making, and deep learning.
Hi, I'm Nitin, and I'm the CSUA Tech Vice President, and the research I'm doing is in graphics, ML theory, and deep learning.
So the first thing we're going to discuss is how to prepare. So the first thing to think of when you think of how to prepare is what are you excited by? And what I mean by this is not just what you believe will have the most impact in the future, but what excites you at the present moment. So excitement can take many forms. It could be future tech that you think will be very, very enjoyable to use. For example, one thing that was exciting to me was virtual reality because there's so much promise there. Problems that seem interesting to you. So if you take a class and you find the work for that class or the projects very compelling, that might be a factor. The classes that you were really, really fun. So maybe you went to some professor's lectures and you found the lectures really interesting. You could contact them and very exciting. You could contact them for research. And finally, what ideas fascinate you? Ideas about what the future might look like that are very, very compelling to you. So keep an open mind with this and don't limit yourselves to what you think might be the most applicable or the most easily transferable to a job. There are many research opportunities at Berkeley. And if you aren't enjoying your research, feel free to switch. There's a lot of different things to try out. And while it is true that spending more time on one area may give you more depth, make sure that whatever research that you want to approach is something that you find pleasurable and enjoyable. So generally speaking, for the classes that you're going to take, lower divs are useful for all research opportunities, even if it might not seem so on the surface. For example, taking a class like 61C can oftentimes, so classes like 61A, B, C, and 70 cover so many of the foundational skills that even if your research area isn't connected to the topic materials of those classes, oftentimes those skills will be used extensively. For example, in 61C, you cover like SSH and remote terminals, and those skills are very, very helpful. If there is an upper div that's relevant to your research, it's very, very recommended that you take it. For example, if you are interested in doing computer security research, taking 161 is helpful, and there's two reasons for this. First, it will give you a clear kind of primer of what material you need to understand in order to be able to approach cutting edge research. And second, it will allow you to figure out, sorry, there's more than two. Second, it will allow you to figure out what in that broad field you are interested in. And finally, oftentimes you can talk to the professor in office hours to figure out what the next steps for research are going to look like. One thing we will discuss is that oftentimes the paths you take for different avenues of research will diverge a lot. So it may be helpful to talk to someone who you're taking a class with to understand what the right path may be. So in terms of preparing, I think another key element is demonstrating motivation. And when I say demonstrating motivation, I don't mean this just in the, just like trying things and doing things, although that's very important. A big part of success in research and what makes a successful researcher is the ability to try things on your own. And even if they're bad ideas, just be able to be somewhat independent. And the best way you can practice this skill before you go into research is these sorts of things. So we have a list here: projects, for example, projects related to, so projects that you can host on GitHub, self-teaching course materials. So for example, if you're interested in ML research, CS231N, which is a course at the Evil Tree School, is a great primer to take that will introduce you to many of the foundational principles. Learning about the field, so contacting people who may be in it. And if you have a field which has a lot of publicly available code, trying to implement the basic ideas from research papers can be really helpful. And not only are these methods going to help you demonstrate that you're really motivated, but they'll also key into professors. They'll strengthen your application, and they'll key into professors that you're really, really excited about this. I do want to say though that if you have a lot of time commitments, none of these things are essential. Don't feel like you have to do things or that there is a massive pressure to do any of these. These things are optional things which, if you are interested in research and want to try it out in a smaller scale, these are great ways to get started that will give you a lot of cascading benefits if you end up deciding to pursue them. So first, what I want to go into is a discussion of these ideas and questions. That's like a high-level overview. Let's spend a couple minutes discussing these ideas. These are kind of high-level ideas, and we want to answer what question y'all have. So I'm going to first open up the questions, and if there's not a lot of questions, we'll start some discussion points. So, any questions?
I'm curious, Ani, you mentioned Stanford's CS231N. Is there a reason why you mentioned that as opposed to like self-studying 189 at Berkeley?
Yeah, so the reason I mentioned that at the moment, this may have changed now, is that many of the resources for different classes so a lot of certain classes have been migrated online. So 231N, in addition to being an online course, has a lot of materials that are online, which sometimes for previous semesters 189, there's not as many resources online. Second, I think that in terms of like coverage, a lot of like 189 tends to focus a bit more on like fundamental, at least because I've kind of gone through both of these. In my experience, 189, they focus on like subtly different areas. And what a lot of people who come to me at least and say they're interested in ML, they're not really focused on like decision trees or like Gaussian methods or things like that. They're focused on like a somewhat narrow portion, which I think 231 covers in depth. Kevin, do you have any other reasons?
Yeah, I would go farther. 189 and 231N are completely different courses.
Yeah, 231N deals with convolutional neural networks, so it's deep learning, because generally when we talk about research in ML, it's usually deep learning, while 189 is regular machine learning. It's not deep learning. So you could study both. And in fact, Jonathan Shuchuk has 189 notes online that you can take a look at. They're pretty useful.
Yeah, I think this depends a little bit on what field of research you're going into. 231N is more useful for most people. And also, it's also, I think, a little bit easier to get into 189.
If you are going to do something like theoretical ML though, then 189 is probably also a good pickup. And if you're curious about what individual thing you're interested, feel free to contact us, because yeah, they have, as people have said, very different syllabi. Okay. Any other questions? That was a great question, by the way.
Thanks for the answer.
Okay. So one discussion point I wanted to bring up briefly before we move on to the next section is do you think that in terms of preparation, which of these things do you think is something that like you don't know really how to approach? Or do you think like which of these do these seem approachable? Is there any of these that seem kind of don't know how you might go for it? And larger point, when we're talking about any of these, are there any of these which you feel like you're wondering if they apply to what you're interested in. So if you want to discuss specific topics, we can kind of go into a bit more detail. Okay, let's go through the next section then. So how to apply.
So in this section, we can talk about the three main ways that you could apply to research at Berkeley. And so this is through cold emailing professors, which in my opinion is one of the most valuable skills you could have. Applying through specific applications, such as those listed on the professor's website, and the DARE application. And you can apply to a lot of professors, such as like Joy Gonzalez and Raizab Ren in the Visual Computing Lab, and many other ones. So yeah, cold emailing professors is one of the most valuable skills you can have for every field. So the thing to keep in mind when doing this is to keep it short, but make sure not to take out any important information. And so generally you follow a specific format when cold emailing professors. And so you essentially want to talk about what you're interested in, how that relates to what the professor is interested in, and how you can help. And this includes, for example, projects or papers that the professor or his grad students have completed that interest you. And it's usually good to name drop these so that they know that you're interested because you've looked at their website or you've looked at the past research that they've done, so they know that you're serious. Personal projects you've done that relate to some required skills. So for example, if like some sort of like AWS is required for a particular job and you have a personal project that does AWS, then you should list that. Or even personal projects that are more theoretical in nature that deal directly with the sort of things that the professor is looking towards. And if you're just applying, if you're a freshman and you're just applying for the first time, it doesn't even have to be related. It just needs to show initiative. So yeah, in addition to that, talk about any relevant classes that you've taken, and don't list any high school courses, just list college courses that you've taken. And if you haven't, then yeah, that's fine, because generally the first two things are the most important. And attach a resume. And so this resume is good. Again, don't put any high school things on this resume. Just list like how good you are in each of these different fields. And if the professor emails you back favorably, then send your transcript as well, so that he has a full idea of where you stand essentially in the undergraduate area. And so this isn't a hard order. So some people like to send the transcripts all at the same time. Other people say that you don't want to send too much information at once because the professor is busy, he's not going to read it. So it depends on your best judgment on how you think, what information you think you should include in the first email. So for specific applications, like Sergey Levine, I believe, for example, they require a specific application, and these ones might require you to have taken CS189 or other classes like CS162 for systems if you want to join, like work directly underneath Yon Stoica, for example. And so before you apply or cold email a professor, make sure that you check the professor's website to see if there's an app for emailing, because you wouldn't want to email it and bypass the app directly because the professor might think something else. And so, yeah, and then again, if there is no specific application and you just want to cold email, then see if the professor requires a particular format on his website, because sometimes they'll have a lot of applications, and so they generally ask for a particular format so that they can quickly browse the information in the email. And the DARE application is it's a new sort of thing in which you can apply to a lot of professors at once. So if I remember correctly, it's a couple of essays that you enter in, talking about why you want to do research and what you expect to get out of it, in addition to what your standing is in undergrad. And then this is sent to every professor, which is like 30 plus professors in BEAR and other top avenues of research at once. And then these professors all look at it, and then they decide whether or not to email you. So the URAP deadline has passed, but I don't think the DARE application has passed. So if you want to do that, bypassing the need to cold email many of these professors, then you can do so. However, sometimes cold emailing one particular professor is more personal, and so that shows more initiative than just completing a DARE form. And this is the website for DARE.
So one thing I want to add for DARE is that you get matched to you can potentially get matched to individual projects, and that matching to individual projects allows you to kind of have a clear idea of what opportunities there are. So I know that the list of faculty is pretty large. This is a fairly new program, and we are, I personally hope that this becomes a bit more widely used for projects, because having some sort of structure makes things easier for everyone. But do understand that this is not like the end all be all. There are a lot of opportunities that exist outside this program. This is just one that's recently popped up that we think is important to highlight.
Yeah, and make sure that you don't get discouraged if you get rejected from like one of these things, because try everything that you get and see which one sticks, essentially.
Never get discouraged by rejections. That's kind of like I think that's one thing that's like important to discuss, is that like rejection is kind of a part of like trying new things and trying things that are hard to do. So that's okay. So we're also going to discuss our experiences applying and how we got into research and what that process looked like. Nathan, do you want to start? Or?
Yeah, sure. So right now I'm currently working in ML theory and graphics in Professor Ng's lab, which is in the visual computing lab. And so I essentially got this email because my last internship, not this last one, but the one before that, was at Samsung. And there I worked a lot with the graphics pipeline as well as graphics research. And so when applying to Ren, I sent him my resume and he noticed that was there. And he said, okay, you can come in for a quick interview. It looks like you have all the skills required for this, so we won't ask for like anything else. And he didn't ask me for GPA or anything, because he looked at the personal products that I had as well, and then saw that I had the skills for sort of what he and the grad students were looking for. So I did this also by cold emailing Ren and including that stuff. So like what projects he was working on that I was interested in, as well as like a referral from another professor, and then my resume. And so that was how I was able to get into that lab.
Kevin, do you want to give your experience?
Yeah. My first research thing I did, I started my first semester, so I also had like no relevant classes or anything at this time. I looked around on the Bear or like the Berkeley EECS website, found a couple professors, and I just like cold emailed them. I included like some of the projects of each professor that I liked. So I ended up working with Marty Hurst. She paired me with the grad student who had worked on the projects I had talked about. We didn't really have an interview. It was more just like a chat. And I worked with her for a while. Later, I applied to another lab in RL. Also, I just like cold emailed with my resume and stuff. And I also worked for that lab.
Yeah, I had a slightly different experience. So my first lab was actually not in EECS. It was in Haas. It was actually about looking at text and trying to determine like biases in text. And so that I got through the URAP program, I think second semester freshman year. And then I tried that. It wasn't for me for various reasons. And so the semester after that, I kind of went to a lot of talks to try to find some things that were interesting to me. I found at one of those talks, I met Professor Kurt Kreutzer, and I talked to him afterwards. And after that, I sent him an email. And after that email, I joined his. And I went and I worked on kind of like a draft project which was kind of unrelated, but just to kind of get my bearings. That's the phrase, get my bearings. And after that, I kind of joined fully onto his lab and started working on projects. So those are our experiences. The final thing we're going to discuss is any questions about this part?
So I noticed most of you contacted professors as opposed to like co-emailing grad students. So is that generally the better approach to reach out directly to a professor as opposed to a grad student? And would there be a difference in, I guess, the email format if you were to reach out to one or the other?
Yeah, it's sort of different. So again, this will depend on the lab. So normally like labs with a huge amount of grad students, like so I was part of Rise Lab a couple of years ago. And so I cold emailed the grad student using a similar format. And so yeah, it just basically depends on what lab you're applying to. Some labs are small enough that you can directly email the professor, and the professor will set you up a meeting with one of his grad students or just work with you directly. Or if the lab is large enough, then you can just email one of the grad students. It just depends on your judgment as well.
I think if you have the capacity to email an undergrad of that particular lab would be better suited to tell you the answer to this question. I think in some sense, it's best if the professor can like visualize you with a grad student. And I think like if you were to put specific things in your email to indicate that you would work with like a particular grad student, or if that grad student would ask us to work with you, I think that makes like finding mentorship for you easier. But I think that's like my perspective on reasons why to email a grad student.
I would echo that. It changes lab to lab. Generally, small labs, you email professors for. It's very much a question of like, usually it's just like you want to make sure someone reads your email. At larger labs, professors tend to get like inundated with hundreds and hundreds of emails every day. And that means that like sometimes you can get buried. So contacting a grad student who has less emails might get you a response quicker.
I see. Thanks.
Any other questions?
So as you said, like a lot of time professors are really busy and like they won't maybe read your email, they probably won't respond to your email. Do you guys know like maybe what's a good number of professors to apply to such that like you're more likely to get a response but without like overwhelming yourself with like just sending out too many?
I would say that going back to my earlier point, the number of professors you apply, you should start with the question, like, what am I like most interested in? Like, pick what that number one thing is and figure out who's doing that and go from there. And the reason I say that is because I feel this is, I think different people have different perspectives. You're right, there is a risk associated with it, but if professors don't give you a response, so I think there's two tracks, right? Professors directly say, okay, I am not interested in new undergrads at this time, or they just don't respond. If they don't respond, I think it would make more sense to contact a grad student. If they do say they're not interested in grad students at this time, then it's kind of like unfortunate. But at a high level, I would say you don't want to be applying to places because for the sake of applying. And the reason for that is you want to be able to have like you want to be excited for the project that you're working on, right? And if you kind of lose that, and if you are excited and you can identify projects that excite you that they are working on, then you should send that email. So my advice would be, it's like ideally, and if you can't get up to that, if there's so many exciting ones, which there are at Berkeley, you can send I would just send them out. Especially that's kind of what I did, is I sent out quite a few when I was a freshman and looked outside of EECS for opportunities. Because oftentimes as a freshman, it's tough to get those opportunities. But I would say that should be the main factor, is how excited are you for it to work on them, rather than necessarily a number. I'm curious what everyone else's perspective is on this.
My plan, my first semester, is I picked 3 professors and I emailed, and I thought that if they didn't get back to me in a few weeks, I would email like 3 more professors or something. I don't know. That was just my strategy back then. I don't just generally think that you should email too many professors. Probably because like there's not that many professors that fit you anyway. But you should definitely like put time into each email and make sure it's tailored to each professor.
That was both of those questions were really, really great. So I'm glad that they were asked. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Oh, it's so dark here. But like, when in the semester do usually people apply for research? Is it just usually in the beginning of the semester, or like does it not really matter?
I know it's pretty rolling. Like some people apply at the beginning of the semester, but generally, like generally people don't apply at like the end of the semester. But people, I would say like anytime in September or October, you can just, if you're like, especially for emails where it's an informal thing, research labs don't as strictly follow the kind of idea of a semester as kind of we as undergrads with all our classes do. So just apply whenever. If it's towards the end of the semester and there's a pretty large break coming soon, it might need it. That changes things. The exception with this, I would say, would be for summer. Summer research opportunities you should contact kind of well in advance because those are oftentimes paid, and so are either paid or like more involved during the semester. They're like you're spending 20 to 40 hours working on this particular project. So that you need to do it significantly in advance. Otherwise, I would say pretty much rolling.
Okay, thank you.
Do you guys have other perspectives? Do y'all have other perspectives on this? Kevin and Nathan? Or?
Well, I guess, yeah, basically what you said, because research projects or papers generally last like at least one semester. And so if you apply, then you have a pretty good chance of like being able to do work on those semesters. And that also like goes hand in hand with like emailing professors or grad students to find out what are the current projects that are going on.
Yeah. Any other questions? These are great. Keep them coming. Yeah.
So it might be a bit too late asking about this now this semester, but would you recommend doing applying for internships? Sorry, not internships. Applying for research positions through URAP?
I mean, so high level, it doesn't really matter how you apply.
Okay.
URAP is I actually found that URAP tends to have not a ton of projects. And so I am of the opinion that cold emailing and also the URAP application process doesn't allow you to demonstrate in that initial send why you're as excited about the project relative to, I think, a cold email where you can highlight the projects you're super excited about, or there at least you have like the essays which are basically asking that question. So I don't think that there's anything like special about the URAP application. It has a lot of cool projects, especially if you're interested in applying CS outside of like pure CS research. There's a ton of cool projects on there which deal with that. But if you are interested in kind of like EECS department research, I don't think there's there's not any specific reason to apply through URAP.
Great, thanks.
One thing you could also do is look at a list of URAP projects and then cold email the professor after like about those projects, so you don't actually like apply through URAP. There's a funny story from when I was at Rice Lab. So 70 people applied through URAP to the position that are as like an undergrad researcher under the grad student that I was currently under, and none of them got accepted. I don't know if it's different now, but back then nobody got accepted, and I just cold emailed, and then I was accepted. So I guess it really also just depends on like the project.
It depends on person. Student. I was one of those 70 people, by the way. And this is. But it definitely depends. That's not universal. There are some professors, read the website. Some professors say, apply through URAP. That's how you apply to my lab. And if they say that, do not cold email them. Every application that you send should involve you should start practicing the research on the professors before you do the real research. So yeah, I think that's the one caveat for URAP is I remember there were one or two people when I was looking around who said only apply through Europe.
All right.
Yeah. Any last questions? Okay. Let's move on to how to thrive in research.
That was muted. Okay. This part maybe less relevant now, but I think it's still good to think about and something to consider definitely once you do start research. So I think it's important sort of to get advice from others. I mean, this doesn't really have to start after you get research, but it's sort of definitely something that happens in some lab structures where you might feel like very lonely doing research, or you might be like working by yourself or just with your grad student day to day. And I think you should take time to learn from others and speak with others. And I think like the advice you'll get from other people will help your perspective. It'll help your sort of to do research better. I think it also makes you less lonely. And I think there's also a lot of advice for grad students online. As an undergrad researcher, you should act a lot like a grad student in terms of your perspectives. So I think a lot of these guides, etc., are also very useful. I think something also is sort of a piece of advice I heard from a professor is that something you should do is when someone like tells you something or when they give you certain advice, you should think about like why they value that advice. And that might even tell you like more than what they said itself or give you more perspectives. Also similarly, in the same vein of not just doing some work every day or every week, you should also learn about the broader field. As an undergrad researcher, you'll be working on probably some assigned project, but you should also take the time to learn more about just your project. You should be able to answer things like, why is your project important to your field? Things like, why am I doing this work today? What am I currently working towards? And as like a holistic learning experience, you shouldn't focus too much on this narrow thing. And it'd be really good moving forwards to learn a lot about your whatever field you're working in. So a lot of the skills that you'll develop from research, these are maybe things you work towards. There are also maybe reasons why you should do research. It's sort of like how to understand and find things that are relevant to your research. Just skills like finding resources, sort of this conventional notion of like how to search things up that are relevant. You also learn a lot from these things. And I guess a very related skill is how to maximally learn from these things that you find. You'll learn a lot, like presentation skills are very important. Things like how do you advertise your work? How would you present your work to someone who knows the field really well? How would you present your work to your friends who know nothing about CS? And also things like how to communicate with your mentors. Your mentors are probably really busy, especially if they're your professor. You might not be able to communicate them with them often, and you'll have to like compact a ton of information, take the most important ideas into like 30 minutes or something. So this is like these are very important skills to develop. And as a whole, research in general is very different than academics. I think this has been talked about a lot. You sort of work on open ideas, come up with new directions that other people haven't explored before. And this is sort of like a novel skill. And this is very related to startups, as my professor likes to say, where you sort of investigate these new domains and try and explore them. So this is kind of like the exciting part about research. And finally, there's going to be like a lot of smart people in research. You're going to see a lot of people appear very successful, and you'll probably fail like 9 days out of 10. And that's just kind of what research is like. And you'll also develop pain tolerance.
On a more bright note, maybe, you'll hopefully overcome that imposter syndrome and realize that you belong doing research as long as you're excited and put in the effort.
Okay, And finally, some of the big picture ideas is that, so as I said before, these skills are really the important part of doing undergrad research, more so than any project you work on. They're very relevant for startups. They're relevant for industry. And of course, for grad school, they're useful. You'll develop connections with your grad students, etc. And you should try and develop like a research story. Like, why was I working on this? What did I work on, etc.
Sorry, any questions about this part? About kind of how to make the most out of research? Or questions overall about the whole kind of, that's all we have. So this is the time for questions about the whole larger picture.
You can also give like much more personalized advice. There's not
Yep.
many people, so.